it starts with character. The age-old adage, a fish rots from the head, comes to mind. Every communication, whether it's written, verbal, that comes from a leader is a coaching opportunity, whether formally or informally, to be able to then build depth of leadership in their organization. His ability to galvanize an entire nation around bringing out the best in ourselves to get to this unknown celestial body, to quote one of his speeches.
Welcome to Inspired Conversations, an inspired leadership podcast where we have honest conversations about life and leadership. This is a space where we explore leadership as it is lived, not just as it is taught. Each conversation goes beyond theory to examine the realities leaders face and to reflect honestly on the state of leadership in our society. We look at the pressures, the decisions, and the responsibility that comes with influence. In short, we explore the practice of leadership and the real, sometimes messy, often paradoxical ways it shows up in our day-to-day lives. I'm Tendai Chitapi, your host. Let's get into today's conversation. I'm joined in studio today by Shingai Ngara, who is a strategic advisor coming from the management consulting and transaction advising space. He advises senior executives interested in the green economy, low carbon economy, transition in agriculture, mining, fintech, real estate, and education sectors. He's a data-driven systems thinker and relationship building practitioner who aims to be part of the process that improves human dignity and ecological harmony while making African institutions globally competitive. Welcome, Shingai.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
So, to kick us off, we are seeing repeated failures of leadership across public and private sectors. Corruption, weak accountability, declining public trust. Do you believe that we are facing a leadership crisis, or are we misdiagnosing something deeper?
I would absolutely go with the idea that we're facing a leadership crisis. And perhaps first, what will be important will be to give some kind of a frame as to what we mean by leadership. You know, there's some of these words that are commonplace, but we need to ground what we mean by them.
Absolutely.
For me personally, what is leadership? Leadership is the ability to bring calm, clarity, and coherence to what is typically a chaotic context in order to create concerted action. And all of these elements are important. The calm and the clarity are very important. We need to be able to sense, make, and diagnose what is this context that we're in? What is happening around us? And to then give a direction that has coherence. So we would like to then take this thing in a particular direction, yes. Right? And where there's a lot of noise and a lot of frenetic activity, or there's people pulling in different directions, create some sense of convergence that where we want to go, we're here, we want to go there. And so what we are seeing, to your introduction, in both public and private sectors is we are seeing internationally, we see a lot of performance and verbosity. Locally, we are not experiencing, across both public and private, real clarity to direct, to say, this is the direction in which we'd like to go. This is the destination which we'd like to get to. How are we bringing everybody along to get to that destination? And so I certainly am of the school of thought that it is very easy to have bosses and managers, and they are commonplace. it's very difficult to find leaders. And I do feel that, yes, indeed, there is a leadership crisis.
When you look across your experience, again, across industries, across geographies, you have spoken to local leadership deficits, global leadership deficits, and reflecting on your journey and how that has shaped your leadership perspective. Where do you see leadership breaking down most consistently? Is it competence, character, systems?
So I'll certainly say that it starts with character. The age-old adage, a fish rots from the head, comes to mind. So we certainly need to have a quality of leadership that helps to anchor the particular context that it finds itself in and give direction. So I like a paradoxical idea in which one is an atheist and the other is a religious person. So I like Friedrich Nietzsche and Ignatius of Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits. And in their different ways, they have very similar ideas. So Nietzsche talks of the will to power, which is really around how does an individual overcome themselves, overcome the difficulties of life so that they can push on with what they like to do. Loyola talks of the need, first and foremost, for leaders to be extremely self-aware and to be able to locate how they lead in their ability, first and foremost, to lead themselves as a precursor to being able to lead other people. And so I find that when we are in environments where the leadership is or the people who are very visible, are very performative, are very dramatic, there's a grievance as to how they other certain groups to corral their own, we're not seeing a high caliber of self-mastery that gives the legitimacy in how to then lead to a particular direction. So I would certainly be of the view that first and foremost is to interrogate where the person in charge is with themselves, how they are leading themselves as the necessary precondition for their ability to lead others.
Wonderful. And thank you for framing that so well, because I think we're trying to, something I'm grappling with is how do we locate the failure points in the leadership systems as they currently exist, and the leadership landscape as it currently expresses itself. We are seeing that self-awareness is, I think, the foundation of strong leadership, because it provides something in which a person can self-reflect before they outwardly influence.
Correct.
And I'm finding that in the absence of that, this performance culture, this verbosity, this sometimes withdrawing and avoidance, also leadership behaviors that are communicating signals to the people that are quote unquote being led, and compromising trust in that way. And so, do you think that to some extent we have confused high performance or technical capability with leadership potential? And maybe to follow on that, have we lost a sense of objective criteria by which we are evaluating whether an individual has leadership capability? And I ask this in that way because sometimes, and in many instances, we found that when interrogated, some of the basic conditions for even just technical leadership have not been met in many institutions by people who then are in very senior positions. And I'm wondering if we have lost the ability or even a baseline framework of what should we be looking for, what criteria should we be looking for in a leader so to shorten the question, it's have we confused high performance or technical ability with leadership potential in the first instance? And in the second instance, we might ask, what criteria really are we using when we are looking for leaders in these various spaces?
So I think the first question is absolutely clear, that we take excellence and conflate it with leadership. And I think we need to leave space for excellence to be excellent in its own right, and separate that from the necessity to lead. So to use perhaps a cliche example, arguably the greatest soccer player of all time, Pele, consistently in his entire career was never team captain. It was understood that he was the person who the team revolved around from an excellence point of view to get the team to a particular place, but at least insofar as the last one, Carlos Alberto Pereira, when they won the last World Cup that he was part of, he was the guy who was leading. And that was very, very important, that there was that distinction between this is the guy who is technically brilliant in this arena, but the guy who can corral, bring the best out of others, guide them in a particular direction, move them in a particular way. That was somebody else.
Yeah.
So I think often that Pele, Alberto Pereira distinction is missed, and then there's a conflation to think that the person who is the most excellent one is the one who should then lead. So when we're then asking, well, then what do we mean by the person who's going to lead? And I'll go back to Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits. He had something that he called leadership substance. And he broke it down into 4 elements. And the 4 elements that he articulated were, 1, as we've said before, self-awareness. The second element that he said was ingenuity. So how do I look at all that is around, however much or little it is, and be able to frame how we can use it towards getting to a particular direction? The third was heroism. And this was an ability to energize, to get people to be motivated by the bigness of an idea, of the aspiration. What are we trying to do here? And the fourth, which sounds a bit pithy, but is actually very important, was love. Yeah. He said we need to lead with a love greater than fear. So when you are in a context and you can genuinely feel that this person who is in front of us, who is purporting to take us somewhere, I can feel in my own right that this person has my best interest at heart. I can feel that this person is taking us in a direction that feels very exciting to then go on. He's bringing us together in a way that makes the group perform better. And he's able to self-regulate and self-manage him or herself such that they don't put out all of their stuff onto the rest of us. There's a buying in that then takes place. And so I'm very, very persuaded by that leadership substance idea. Yeah. Self-awareness, ingenuity, heroism, and love as what are we articulating as leadership substance.
I really love that that framework. I've never come across it before, but I think it's absolutely spot on. And in many spaces, what we are seeing around how conversations are being had around leadership, there seems to be a growing awareness that, okay, we've probably missed something along the way of learning what makes a good leader. And there seems to be a bit of self-reflection that is happening, of which conversations like this are an example, and I think in many different contexts are happening in many different ways. But what I am grappling with, and I think really coming to understand, is that there are many systems in this world that have been built and framed around fear and anxiety and control. Right? Those are the systems of the world that are driving much of the calamity that we then experience, and largely from the top, as you've said, the fish rots from the head down. And so I am equally persuaded by this idea of ingenuity, heroism, and love on top of self-awareness, as really critical pillars that you want to have embodied by leaders as we move forward. And I think then shift our social environment out of this anxiety and fear and control and into systems that are built on love and care and belonging. And it's unusual to talk about love and care and belonging in contexts such as organizations, such as the military, such as public and private sectors, and in communities that have largely been defined by very rigid and very cold understanding or engagement or interaction with the humanity behind our day-to-day lived experience. And I think when you have removed yourself from that humanity, a lot of the unfortunate behavior that we see becomes something that one can easily resolve in their conscience. And that brings me to this idea that many organizations, speak about accountability. But very few seem to demonstrate it consistently, right? In your experience, where does accountability actually break down?
So I think, just to kind of, build up on that fear-based paradigm, one certainly does see that, particularly in how people relate to superiors in a place of work, all right? There is a more overriding consideration around what are the consequences around the fact that this person pays my paycheck, fundamentally. And what one is advocating for is naturally that dimension is in place. And, the management theory has the McGregor X and Y ideas of, do you treat people in a very robotic and unit sense, and you give them prescribed tasks and you effectively whip them into performance? Or do you energize and excite people, bring out the best in them, and then actually have a better performance that you then get out of them, right? And so I certainly am of the view that where we're kind of falling apart from an accountability perspective is people who are purporting to be in charge are not taking sufficient consideration for how it is that being in charge is actually a very other-centered activity. So I am leading this team of people, and so I am wanting to make sure that I understand how to bring out the best in each of these individual people. Again, to a football metaphor, I like the idea of man-to-man marking, which defenders do in football, guarding that they call it in basketball, which is the person who's in charge has a personal relationship with each of the people in their domain, in which in that personal relationship, there's a real bringing together of the totality of this person, because all of us bring all of us into a particular space, all of our story, all of our baggage, all of our whatever. And so this person is then able to articulate that I am taking accountability as the leader to understand this person quite deeply in what they say and what they don't say. That helps me to understand them better, so that I can work with this person to bring out the best in them. And I find that step of leadership is missing. What is very easy is the instruction around, I need X, Y, and Z by this date. That part, I think people very easily do. But the part where concomitantly, I need to understand you, bring out the best in you. I don't find that there's enough taking accountability for that necessary step in leading.
It's so apt and I think important that you have sort of touched on the tension that someone who's leading has to grapple with in terms of lifting the best out of the people that they're leading. And to your earlier point around the word leadership, sometimes language can be a help or a hindrance. And, I think there's this understanding or the sense that leadership is for the leaders over there.
Sure.
And we are being led over here.
Sure.
Right? Whereas actually what we are finding and what emerges is that leadership begins with leadership of self.
Correct.
And that therefore means that leadership is for everyone.
Correct.
It is a mindset rather than something positional, right? And again, then bringing that into the accountability space, you also see that it is a skill that can be learned.
Critically important point.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that, I think that the way we bridge accountability and that learning is to say, okay, this individual needs to learn, and I as a leader have to create the environment for them to learn to lead. So I'm interested, I like that balance that we strike when we talk about accountability, because I think sometimes we do approach it with a very rigid lens. And I would also argue that certainly where there has been the degree of sort of non-accountability and the culture of non-accountability that we have seen, there are probably times when you need to lean a little bit more to the harder approach, just because of the lives that are being impacted by the ways in which people are leading or not leading, quite frankly. And so that takes me to the idea of leadership development now, both in organizations, but also in our society more broadly.
Yes.
Organizations are investing heavily in leadership development. Why do you think we are not seeing a corresponding improvement in leadership quality? I mean, are we developing the wrong things? Are we avoiding hard parts, the character? You talk about consequences. Are organizations just unwilling to, change the systems that leaders operate in? Why are we not seeing that translate?
So I'll start with a corporate example to answer that question, because I think that's a very well-framed question. Somebody who got to prominence, he took General Electric from a $20 billion business to a $400 billion business, was Jack Welch. Now, Jack Welch understood that his primary job as leader, was the building of other leaders. He understood that very clearly.
Yeah.
So he had a 4E framework, which I don't quite remember it all off by hand, but it was around excellence and energizing and so forth, right? And it was, as he was assessing managers for who he was going to promote and take forward, he was really looking at the quality of the individual and what he could impart from his breadth of experience to bring out a high quality of leadership in his cohort. And if you look at the number of his cohort who then went on to become CEOs in other organizations like Home Depot and so on and so forth, he had a very good bench strength of leadership that he built. And so I think it is an understated consideration that actually the best leaders are the ones who have an ability to build other leaders. I think that is very, very understated. Right. But it's crucially important, because what you're looking for is you are trying to create performance in whatever the context that you are in. You naturally, by definition, cannot do everything. So your ability to bring out the best leadership in somebody else so that they, in turn, learn how to bring out the best in the people who are in their charge is, for me, is the crucially important requirement of somebody who takes on the mantle of being the person who seeks to lead. To use a contemporary South African example, if you look at the African National Congress under Oliver Tambo, you saw that there was a very deliberate cultivating of the Thabo Mbekis of the world and a whole cohort of people who then came up. And that was a very clear understanding from him that his role was to build depths of leadership for the organization to then progress.
Wonderful. So, what I've understood there is organizations are investing almost in the learning, but not creating that pipeline.
Yeah.
And understanding that if you're going to develop leaders at this level, but neglect leaders at this level, and developing leaders below that, you are almost in building a leadership drought into your organizational design. And you've cited two great examples, Jack Welch building leaders, Thabo Mbeki building leaders, and again you then see where some of those organizations have fallen apart is because people have then not continued that practice of building leaders. So that, I would conclude that when we talk about leadership, we have to talk about leadership as strategy and leadership systems rather than just leadership of capability of individuals.
So I think so, and I think what's starting to happen as I observe organizations is they're starting to become something of a commoditizing of this textbook of leadership, and there's the 7 this, the 4 this, the 33 this, the 48 that, and so forth, right? There needs to be, in my view, call it the big conversation and the little conversation. And what I mean by that is every time that I am, as a leader, interacting with people in my ecosystem, every one of those conversations is an opportunity to demonstrate leadership and to coach leadership.
Yeah.
So whether it is a formal program to articulate, for example, these are our values, this is our vision, this is our mission, and it's a very big, high and mighty principle like that, yes, that is an articulation of leadership and a bringing together of people. But more importantly is, even at the canteen, that little 5-minute conversation that helps me to understand what is somebody struggling with, how can I help them to improve on that, how can I help them to think better around not just that particular issue, but how can they think better to improve their overall performance? And again, how can they feel that, this person really is interested in my development and my well-being? Yeah. Every communication, whether it's written, verbal, that comes from a leader is a coaching opportunity, whether formally or informally, to be able to then build depth of leadership in their organization. What I find, and I've worked in multiple sectors, sort of very hard charging mining environment, insurance and others. What I find is that propensity to really look at each opportunity, each conversation as an opportunity to build the depth of leadership in my organization starts to fall away. Then you have something that then gets taken on by HR, and then there is, again, a methodological and commoditized approach to what is called leadership development, whereas it really needs to be something that is very well lived, very well demonstrated, and very well reflected. So I have a little consideration around feedback systems, which I call run and reflect. So do something, and then let me see what comes back. And let me see that what comes back, does it show me that maybe the way I came across was too strong, it was too weak, it was too pushy, or maybe the way I positioned things went over people's heads, and so forth, right? So it's always about how am I reflecting on what is happening in the ecosystem, how am I improving myself, and that's critical to our self-mastery conversation that we had at the beginning. How am I improving myself daily? And this is a daily exercise, right? So I'm reflecting daily. What did I do today? What was the impact of that? How can I do it better, right? And then I'm then creating an environment that invites other people to also reflect on how it is that they're impacting the environment as well. I'm not saying, the courses out of business schools and so forth are not needed. I think they help to give vocabulary, right?
Yes.
So I think it is important to have vocabulary, but that vocabulary must be grounded in the lived experience and how the lived experience is dynamically giving demonstration of that vocabulary in practice, and then we then create a virtuous cycle of improving the leadership substance in the organization.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I think you've really framed this the importance of leadership behavior as a critical measure and a critical driver of creating a culture of leadership in an organization. Yes, the frameworks and the models, the tools, the acronyms, they're all important. But I think, as you've articulated, they just provide language for us to be able to speak to the deeper need for an internal turning of all of those lenses on oneself.
Right.
So, if it's all great to then learn Model X and then preach about it in the business to the people. The people are always looking at you and saying, but what about you?
Sure.
One question I often get in a lot of the leadership work that I do in groups of middle and senior managers, the question that's often asked is, have our leaders been on this program?
Interesting.
Because
Very interesting.
they feel like they are getting this enlightened understanding of authentic leadership, of self-awareness and emotional intelligence and active listening and courageous conversations. They are learning all of these amazing tools, but then they're going back into an environment that has not itself shifted to carry and sustain what they've learned. So it begs the question for me that to what extent is this a leadership problem versus a system problem that produces and then protects poor leadership?
Oh, that's a fascinating consideration. So I think what tends to happen in most organizations is that the people on top reproduce people who are somewhat in their image, or at the very least, people who they are comfortable with. And so to your point, when that has been the modality around which people are rising in an organization, and then now there is this new economy, courageous conversations, and all of this fantastic vocabulary, we come back to, if this is not being role modeled by the people who are in very senior positions in the organization, it will struggle to stick. And so it is very important that the articulated, and again, I mean, language is important. The articulated culture of the organization, accepted behaviors, values, those things that are being articulated, it is very important that the senior leaders demonstrate that and walk that talk. That is the most most important driver of being able to then infiltrate that in the organization. But if there's a very clear divergence, those wonderful things that external consultant and external coach came and said, but I come back on Monday morning and it is more of the same of before, it just will not stick in an organization.
Yeah, and I think it then raises the fact of that tension that you then experience as someone who has acquired leadership learning, however you have acquired it, and entered into a system where those shifts have not been sufficiently established as this is the direction we're going. Where I often use the example that you cannot teach leadership over 2 days with the muffins and expect that people are going to come back and now they're leaders.
Yeah.
It has to be a sustained, long-term, it's behavior change, it's culture change. And so there has to be a multiplicity of factors that are jointly moving towards a leadership, the creation of a leadership landscape. And in the absence of that tension sometimes then requires people to have courageous conversations, sometimes more often than they need to. Mm-hmm. And sometimes leaders who are wanting to move away from this, as it has always been done, approach that we train and raise up and create informal networks and systems of people that look like us, and we just perpetuate a certain leadership approach. Mm-hmm. What does leadership courage look like in practice today? And especially in environments with highly entrenched legacy and where speaking up carries risk.
So, what does leadership courage look like today? I think that's a very important question, because we are in a period. There was a book called No Ordinary Disruption that came out of the McKinsey Global Institute over a decade ago, but it was very, very informed around we are in a period of change, technology, flows of people, aging, and so forth, right? So we are in a time of change, and that becomes a very important consideration, because what that then means is that we need a quality of leadership that can move confidently into the unknown, right? Now, when a particular process or project type has got a very clear pathway, you follow A, B, C, D, E steps, then anybody who has been trained in whatever, Prince 2 project management or whatever the case may be, can sort of take a formula and run with that, right? But when we're in an environment where things are dynamically changing, the climate is changing, AI tools are coming out at rapid pace and so forth. Now it is, what is my ability to sit with discomfort? There's a term in the psychology they call distress tolerance, right? So for the person who is wanting to be in charge and lead, that person has got to have a very high threshold of distress tolerance, an ability to sit with, I don't really know what's happening here, how fast change is coming at us from perhaps some internal factors, but definitely from external factors. But I have an ability to, within a set of values and acceptable behaviors, meet an unknown. So, if I really just don't know, for example, what are we going to do with this proliferation in AI? How much is it going to change our workflow and so forth, right? So I have a concern about that. Maybe I'm not a coder and so forth. So I have a concern about that as a leader. The real consideration is, when we have discussed what are our approved values and behaviors, how do I bring the demonstration of the approved values and behaviors to the environment of change? So that, again, to my earlier comment, it's about how do you bring calm and clarity? So even though it's something that is rapidly changing, I don't need to be the expert, but I need to be the person who creates the environment that we can then have a calm as we approach it, and then the experts can then guide us as to how we then undertake. So it is important that we have people who are looking to get up and lead, who have an ability to deal with, again, there was an acronym, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, right? So it is important that we have people who are able to deal with a rapidly changing environment as the environment is changing, because at core, the values and the behaviors bring a calm confidence as to this guy or this lady is taking us forward into this unknown, but the credibility with which they're doing that, we're going to sign on to following this person as we go.
Awesome. You've spoken about the ability to hold paradox, the ability to sit with that tension, this VUCA world, the fast evolving nature of technology today. To bring it home somewhat, I think you've partially spoken to this, but what would you say makes leading in South Africa difficult today?
Oh, now that's a very, very complex. How much time do we still have? So I think one of the first things to do in leadership, in whatever context you find yourself, is to bring. There's a word in the literature, and the system thinking literature, called sense making, right? So how do we just make sense of what's going on here, right? So let me give an example that is actually quite top of mind for me, based on some of the work that I do, right? If you take a cohort in grade 1, you'll say that that's about 1.2 million people. Of that cohort in grade 1, there's attrition along the way, and 5% of that, about 60,000 people, get above 50% maths mark in core maths at the matric level, right? 5% from that cohort in grade 1, right? Now, the ability to deal with this now, absolutely, there are going to need to be educational consultants and experts around how do you teach maths differently and considerations like that. But addressing this very fuzzy dynamic is going to fundamentally be a test of leadership. Leadership is going to be required to first sense make. Where does this attrition start? So that of that original 1.2 million, only 700,000 even wrote matric at the end. Where does that start? How do we create supportive enablers at the different points that the attrition takes place? How do we understand how much of those are cognitive? Is it an understanding issue? Maybe linguistic, maybe cultural, maybe children don't feel supported, maybe it is dynamics at home, dynamics in their community. How much do you understand all of this and sense make, right? So this is what the set of contributing factors are that have led to this 5% pass rate at the end, right? So now we've done some sense making, and we must keep in mind that sense making is also dynamic. We come to a first cut analysis when we have to be ready to keep on updating and revising as we learn as we go. Then to identify some very targeted, high impact interventions. So from an educational theory point of view, you've got to come in early at the grade 4 level so that you can really improve the comprehension and the interest and the engagement with the subject matter. So, find what are the points of taking action where one action is going to lead to the greatest possible effect. And again, this is now a leadership issue. I think what often happens is we have conversations in a South African context, and there'll be 10 great ideas that will be discussed about whatever the issue is. But there needs to be what I call a value-mediating mechanism. So there were 10 great ideas, but actually only those 3 are going to have the biggest possible impact in creating change. So let's take note of the other 7, and let's figure out how it is that we're going to take the 3 that are going to really have the biggest possible impact in trying to then create a system solution. So what I find in a South African context is we will get the headline, 5% over 5% of students who started grade 1 got over 50% matric maths. And then we very easily start to figure out who to point fingers at. We very easily start to reach into older narratives and rehash them in the new context, as opposed to bringing a quality of leadership that says, here's the phenomenon. Let's now start to sense make. Let us now bring a quality of organization that can value mediate. Well, so sense making, then have very good, structured, facilitated conversation to arrive at those 10 insights. Then let's have a value mediating mechanism to say, but these 3 are going to have the greatest impact. Yeah. Then have a quality of leading that can pull together a group of people to then act on those 3 and then measure as we go. Yeah. So I'm finding that it is very easy for us to remain at the emotive conversation. 5%. And so is to blame. I'm finding that we're not quite having, to your point about leadership being everywhere in society, not just people who purport to be in charge, we're not having enough of a conversation that says, so now let us now start to figure out what are the levers that we can pull, that we can start to change the dial. And this is how we're going to mobilize resources, capital, people, systems, and so forth, so that we can get into a coordinated action to then resolve.
That's so good. In some of the work that I'm now doing around systems transformation, there is this idea, to your point around sense making, that if you use an analogy of hand, head, and heart, a lot of where hand is sort of the implementation, the building, the programs, the interventions, the weekend learning classes, whatever.
Right.
The building of the infrastructure, that's the hand.
Right.
And a lot of focus and attention and resourcing happens at the hand level. Additionally, there's the head. This is the strategic level, ideation, planning, policy making. Again, a lot of resources are applied there. But the heart level, where we call it and speak about system sensing, there's not a lot of resourcing that happens at the system sensing level, because that is where some invisible patterns emerge when they are given the room to breathe. And so some of the instruments that are used are instruments of generative dialogue, grounded in things like, Otto Scharmer's theory,
sure.
etc.
Sure,
right?
sure,
so it's exactly that kind of thing that, okay, let's take a moment and we have been solving, what do they say, symptoms instead of root cause.
Correct.
But that root cause is generally at a heart level, and I think there are not structures in place to sufficiently engage that system sensing capability and capacity. But I'm finding that more and more, it's so interesting to me that you have made that point, that sense making is really where there is a fundamental gap that needs to be closed in how we start to address some of these leadership gaps and deficits that we're seeing. That's really good. So with all of that said, and despite everything that we've discussed, I think we've understood some of the ways in which leadership needs to evolve. But what gives you confidence? What gives you hope that strong leadership can still emerge?
I have a lot of confidence and a lot of hope. I'm an optimist about human nature. I like the idea that, to quote a very sort of pithy thing, that every day is a new day to start again. Yeah. And I find that the ability to give that confidence and hope is a very necessary consideration. as a person who reads a lot of history and so forth. I am greatly moved by former American President John F. Kennedy with the quest to go to the moon, because it wasn't articulated as the physics and chemistry of propulsion. It was articulated as stretching the extent of human endeavor, pushing ourselves beyond what we think we are actually capable of doing. And his ability to galvanize an entire nation around bringing out the best in ourselves to get to this unknown celestial body, to quote one of his speeches, was a real demonstration of when we bring a quality of leadership, we can surprise even ourselves about what we're able to bring out of people. And so I remain very, very optimistic that there's a lot of untapped reserve in people that is looking and waiting for a quality of leadership. And again, whether it's at the top or it's just in our organizations, in our families and so on, there's a quality of leadership that can really bring out a stretch and an endeavor about the best of what we are capable of doing. I am very persuaded that our ability to develop leaders with the ability to bring that out of people, our best days can still be ahead. I do not despair. I sort of jump in to see where can I make my contribution.
Wonderful. I think I also sort of equally constructed in that regard. You know, optimism really is a leadership superpower.
Sure.
I guess one challenge I might put as a final question is, if you had to name one, let's call it uncomfortable truth about leadership that organizations are avoiding right now, what would it be?
I think there are several uncomfortable truths, but I think what I would err on as suggesting is something that isn't being given due attention, is the ability to inspire versus command and control. And so I think for all of the complexities of the society and so forth, there's a very easy deferring to command and control. And to our earlier conversation, how when we then come in with very exciting language around a new leadership paradigm that we're then wanting to look forward to, we then find ourselves reverting back to command and control. I think what is not being dealt with enough is what does it take to really become an inspiring leader who can bring out the best in people. And I think why that is becoming very difficult to articulate is because, as we said at the beginning, it then comes back to the people who are purportedly in charge. Where are they with themselves? Where are they with their reflection? Where are they with their ability to self-assess and say, I didn't quite handle that well, as opposed to double down on it? Where are they in looking at how can they, as a matter of daily practice and daily reflection, look to relate better to the people within their ecosystem in galvanizing towards a particular direction point? I don't think enough attention is being given to what does real inspirational, reflective leadership look like, so that we can stretch ourselves as the people who purport to lead and bring out the best leadership ability in the people who we are working with. That's
great. Thank you very much, Shingai. On that note, I think we'll round up our conversation. I've appreciated and really enjoyed, I think, a very engaging and thoughtful conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
That brings us to the end of today's conversation. Join us next time for another episode of Inspired Conversations. Thank you.